At the family party, my greedy daughter-in-law whispered, "That old hag is almost gone. Why waste money on a gift?" I smiled. The next morning, I handed her the lawyer's letter canceling the mortgage. The look on Caroline's face was worth every penny I'd spent on the attorney fees. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she held the document, her eyes widening with each line she read. For 3 years, I had been quietly paying the mortgage on their house. A fact my son James knew, but Caroline had somehow convinced herself was simply their good fortune. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice suddenly stripped of the sugary sweetness she typically used when addressing me in front of others. "It's exactly what it looks like, dear," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'm no longer paying your mortgage. As of today, you and James are responsible for your own financial obligations. I'd spent 68 years being the understanding one, the supportive mother, the doting grandmother who never complained. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching." But standing in their pristine kitchen that I had helped furnish, watching Caroline's perfect facade crumble, I realized I had reached my breaking point. It had started 3 days earlier during Emma's 16th birthday celebration. I'd arrived early to help with preparations, carrying a heavy box of decorations up the driveway when I heard voices through the open window. "Mom wants to know if Grandma is bringing that hideous punch bowl again," Emma was saying, her teenage voice carrying clearly through the spring air. I paused, not intending to eavesdrop but unable to move as I heard Caroline's response. "I don't care what she brings as long as she brings her checkbook," Caroline laughed, the sound brittle and cold. "College tuition isn't going to pay itself, and that old hag is sitting on a gold mine with that house of hers." I stood frozen, the decorations suddenly heavy in my arms. "Mom!" Emma sounded shocked. "That's awful." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Caroline continued. "She's almost gone anyway. Why waste money on a gift? Just smile and nod and think about the inheritance. That's what I do." The box nearly slipped from my fingers as the weight of her words crushed something inside me. I had suspected Caroline's affection was performative, but hearing her speak so callously about my death, about my value being reduced to what she could extract from me financially, it was a wound deeper than I'd ever expected to feel at my age. I managed to back away from the window, return to my car, and sit there until my breathing steadied. Then I applied a fresh coat of lipstick, picked up the decorations, and walked in with a smile as if I hadn't heard a thing. Throughout the party, I watched Caroline with new eyes. The way she paraded me around to her friends, her arm linked with mine, calling me my dear Martha, while showcasing the bracelet I had given Emma, a family heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother. The performance was flawless. Had I not heard her true thoughts, I might have believed she genuinely cared. That night, alone in the house where I'd raised my son, where I'd nursed my husband through cancer until he passed 10 years ago, I made a decision. The mortgage payments I'd been making on James and Caroline's house had been my way of helping them achieve stability. I'd never mentioned them to Caroline. James had asked me to keep it between us, claiming it would hurt her pride. Now I understood. It was her greed, not her pride, that was at stake. Monday morning, I visited my attorney, Eleanor Reed, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who had handled my husband's estate. "Martha," she said after hearing my story, "I've been wondering when you'd come to see me about this arrangement. Legally, those payments you've been making give you certain rights." "I don't want rights, Eleanor. I want to be done." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Then let's make that happen." Now, standing in Caroline's kitchen, watching her perfect world tilt on its axis, I felt no joy, only a quiet resolution. This wasn't about revenge. This was about boundaries I should have established years ago. "Does James know about this?" Caroline asked, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I spoke with him last night," I replied calmly. "He understands." The lie slipped out easily. I hadn't told James yet, but I knew my son. He would be shocked, possibly hurt, but ultimately he would understand that I couldn't continue supporting a household where I was secretly despised. You can't do this," Caroline said, her voice rising. "We have an agreement." "No, dear. James and I had an understanding, not an agreement. There was never anything in writing, which Eleanor assures me means I can stop the payments anytime I wish." I picked up my purse, suddenly eager to leave the tension thickening the air. "I'll see myself out. Please tell Emma I'll see her this weekend." As I walked to my car, my knees felt weak and my heart raced. But with each step, a strange lightness filled my chest. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. I knew what would come next. James would call, confused and hurt. Caroline would spin a tale of my cruelty, my sudden betrayal. The family dynamics would shift, possibly fracture. But as I started my car and pulled away from the house I had helped them buy, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my reclamation, the first step toward the dignity I had surrendered in the name of family peace. The road ahead would be difficult, but as I drove toward home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The quiet satisfaction of finally being true to myself. What I didn't know then was how far Caroline would go to secure what she believed was rightfully hers, or how much strength I still had left to fight for the life and legacy I deserved. My phone rang incessantly that evening. James called 7 times before I finally answered, my hand trembling as I pressed the button. "Mom, what's going on? Caroline said you came by with some lawyer's letter?" His voice was strained, confusion evident in every word. I settled into my reading chair, the one Harold used to sit in, drawing strength from the familiar comfort. "James, we need to talk about the mortgage payments I've been making on your house for the past 3 years." "She wasn't supposed to tell you about those," he said quickly, then caught himself. "I mean, she didn't tell me, James. You did, when we made the arrangement. What did you tell her about where that money was coming from?" The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. "I see," I said softly. "So she thought you were making those payments yourself." "Mom, it's complicated. Caroline has certain expectations about our lifestyle. If she knew we needed help, then maybe you should have bought a house you could actually afford," I said, surprising myself with my directness. "James, I'm not angry about helping you. I'm hurt that it became a secret, something shameful." "It wasn't like that," he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I closed my eyes, memories washing over me. "Do you remember when you were 12 and wanted those expensive sneakers all the other boys had?" "Mom, that's hardly— I worked double shifts at the hospital for 2 weeks to buy them for you. I never told you that. I never wanted you to feel guilty about asking for things." I paused, the weight of decades of similar choices pressing down on me. "But I think that was a mistake." The phone call ended with James promising to come by the next day so we could talk in person. I knew Caroline would be working on him all night, reshaping the narrative to preserve her image and her lifestyle. After hanging up, I wandered through my house, the house where James had grown up, where Harold and I had built our life together. Each room held memories of sacrifices made without hesitation, choices that seemed obvious at the time, but had slowly eroded my own dreams. In the study, I pulled out an old photo album. There I was, 38 years old, standing proudly in front of the community college where I'd finally enrolled to finish my nursing degree. Harold had his arm around me, beaming with pride. 2 weeks after that photo was taken, Harold was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's. My classes were the first thing to go as I picked up extra shifts to cover the mounting medical bills. It seemed like a temporary setback at the time. I turned the page to find James in his cap and gown, his college graduation. By then, Harold's condition had worsened significantly. We'd refinanced the house to pay for James's education after he lost his scholarship in his sophomore year, a fact we never discussed. In the photo, I looked tired but happy. Harold was noticeably thinner, his smile strained with the effort of keeping his symptoms under control for the ceremony. "You have to finish school, Martha," Harold had insisted when I talked about postponing my degree again. "Promise me you'll go back." I had promised, but life kept intervening. Harold's care became more demanding. James married Caroline right out of college. Then came the grandchildren, Emma and David, who quickly became the center of my world after Harold passed. I flipped to a more recent photo, Emma's 10th birthday. Caroline had wanted an elaborate party at an expensive venue. James had called me, embarrassed but desperate. "It's just a tight month, Mom. I'll pay you back." I never asked for repayment, just like I never asked for repayment when they needed help with the down payment on their house, or when David needed special tutoring, or when Caroline decided to remodel their kitchen. I set the album aside and walked to my bedroom closet, reaching for the back corner where I kept a small wooden box. Inside was a brochure for the photography course I'd wanted to take 5 years ago, along with a letter confirming my acceptance into the program. I'd withdrawn when Emma broke her leg and needed someone to care for her after school while James and Caroline worked. There was also a pamphlet for a 2-week tour of Italy, a trip Harold and I had always planned to take when he retired. After he died, I'd almost booked it for myself, but then James and Caroline had needed help with their down payment. At the bottom of the box was my own unfinished dream, an application for a small business loan to open a tea shop near the town square. I'd always loved baking and had a talent for creating unique tea blends. Harold had encouraged the idea before his health declined. I ran my fingers over the yellowed paper, remembering how excited I'd been about the possibility. I'd withdrawn the application when James called about the mortgage 3 years ago. "Mom's always been there for us," he'd told Caroline whenever she complained about my frequent presence in their lives. What he never seemed to understand was that being there for them had meant not being there for myself. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. I hadn't just been supporting my family. I'd been sacrificing my own life, my own dreams, to maintain a relationship with a son who had grown increasingly entitled and a daughter-in-law who saw me as nothing more than a financial resource. I returned to the living room and poured myself a small glass of sherry, Harold's favorite. As I sipped it, I thought about tomorrow's conversation with James. Caroline would have worked on him all night, reframing my decision as a betrayal rather than a boundary. She would position herself as the victim, wounded by my sudden cruelty. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I being too harsh? Was this the action of a bitter old woman lashing out at perceived slights? Then I remembered Caroline's words. That old hag is almost gone anyway. No, this wasn't bitterness. This was self-preservation. This was recognizing, perhaps too late, that I deserved to live whatever years I had left for myself. I finished my sherry and went to my desk, where I kept my financial records. It was time to take a hard look at what I'd given and what I had left. It was time to figure out what Martha Williams wanted for the remainder of her life. As I sorted through statements and receipts, a plan began to form. Not a plan for revenge, but for reclamation. Caroline thought I was almost gone. She had no idea how wrong she was. I was just getting started. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Instead of waiting for James to arrive, I called Eleanor's office and scheduled an appointment for 9 a.m. Whatever conversation awaited me with my son, I wanted to be fully prepared. Eleanor's office was in a converted Victorian home downtown, its interior warm with wood paneling and soft lighting. She greeted me with a firm handshake and keen eyes that missed nothing. "You look different today, Martha," she said as we settled into the comfortable chairs in her office. "More determined." "I am," I replied, smoothing my skirt. "I spent last night going through my finances. I need to know exactly where I stand and what options I have." Eleanor nodded, pulling out a folder with my name on it. "I took the liberty of reviewing your file after our meeting yesterday. I had a feeling you'd be back." She laid out several documents on the desk between us. "Let's start with the basics. Your house is fully paid off, valued at approximately $380,000 in today's market. Your retirement accounts total just over $425,000. There's the life insurance payout from Harold's policy that you've barely touched, $200,000, and your savings account with roughly $42,000. I nodded, following along. These weren't new figures to me. "What might surprise you," Eleanor continued, "is how much you've contributed to James and Caroline's household over the past 5 years. She slid a sheet of paper toward me. "I had my assistant compile this based on the records you've provided over the years for tax purposes." I stared at the number at the bottom of the page, circled in red, $147,632. "That can't be right," I whispered. "It is," Eleanor confirmed. "The down payment on their house, $60,000. The mortgage payments for the past 3 years, $68,400. Emma's private school tuition last year when Caroline insisted public school wasn't good enough, $12,500. Various loans that were never repaid, approximately $6,130. And then there's the value of the childcare you've provided, which I haven't even calculated." I felt slightly dizzy. Seeing it all laid out in black and white was staggering. "Martha," Eleanor said gently, "you've essentially funded their lifestyle, and based on what you overheard, they're counting on inheriting your assets to continue that lifestyle after you're gone." I took a deep breath. "So what can I do?" Eleanor leaned forward, her expression serious. "That depends on what you want. If you're asking about legal recourse for the money you've already given, that's complicated. The mortgage payments could potentially be recovered as they were made under certain assumptions, but the rest would be difficult without documentation showing they were loans rather than gifts. I'm not interested in getting that money back," I said firmly. "What's done is done. I'm more concerned about protecting what I have left and making sure it's used the way I want." A small smile played at the corners of Eleanor's mouth. "Now, that's where we have plenty of options." For the next hour, Eleanor outlined various strategies. We discussed revising my will, setting up trusts for my grandchildren that would bypass their parents' control, and creating a detailed estate plan that would ensure my assets were protected. The key, Eleanor explained, is to make these changes quietly and legally. We don't want to give Caroline any grounds to contest your decisions later. As we talked, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying began to lift from my shoulders. I had more control than I thought. More options than Caroline could possibly imagine. There's one more thing, I said as our meeting was winding down. My house. I've lived there for 40 years, but lately I've been thinking it's too big for just me. Too full of memories. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. Selling could be a good option. It would free up considerable equity, and you could find something that better suits your current needs. What would happen if I sold it? I asked. Legally, I mean. Would James have any claim to the proceeds? Absolutely not, Eleanor assured me. It's your property, purchased with you and Harold. You have complete control over it, and any proceeds from its sale. I sat back, considering this. The house had been my anchor for decades, the place where I'd built my life with Harold, raised James, welcomed my grandchildren. But it was also a burden, too large, too expensive to maintain, too full of ghosts. I need to think about it, I said finally. Of course, Eleanor replied. But Martha, whatever you decide, remember this. You've spent decades taking care of everyone else. It's not selfish to start taking care of yourself now. As I left Eleanor's office, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Running late. Can we meet at 2 instead of noon? I wasn't surprised. Caroline would need extra time to prepare him, to make sure he delivered her message exactly as she wanted. I texted back a simple, fine, and decided to use the extra time to visit the community center downtown. The center offered classes and activities for seniors. Everything from art workshops to fitness classes to travel groups. I'd picked up a brochure months ago, but had set it aside when Caroline called needing me to watch the kids while she attended a spa weekend with her friends. Inside, the center was bright and welcoming. A woman about my age greeted me from behind. The reception desk. First time visiting us? She asked with a warm smile. Yes, I replied. I'm interested in learning more about your programs. Perfect timing. We're just about to start our newcomers orientation. I'm Helen, by the way. Martha, I said, accepting the packet of information she handed me. The orientation was held in a sunny room filled with about 15 other seniors. As the director outlined the various programs and opportunities, I found myself drawn to the photography club and the cooking classes. There was even a group that organized day trips to museums and gardens throughout the region. We believe that retirement should be a beginning, not an ending, the director said, her eyes bright with conviction. It's never too late to explore new interests or revisit old passions. Never too late. The words echoed in my mind as I listened to the enthusiastic chatter around me. These people weren't waiting to die. They were living with purpose and joy. After the orientation, Helen approached me again. So, what did you think? I think I've been missing out, I admitted. How soon can I sign up for classes? Helen laughed. How about right now? The photography club meets on Thursdays and the new cooking series starts next Tuesday. I filled out the registration forms, a sense of anticipation building inside me. For the first time in years, I was doing something purely for myself, not as someone's mother or grandmother or caretaker. As I left the community center, I checked my watch. I still had an hour before meeting James. On impulse, I walked into the small cafe next door and ordered lunch, just for me, at my own pace, with no one to consider but myself. It was a small act of independence, but as I sat there enjoying my meal and watching the world go by, I felt something shift inside me. The conversation with James no longer filled me with dread. I was no longer just reacting to Caroline's cruelty. I was actively choosing a new path forward. By the time I arrived home to wait for James, I had a plan. Not just for our conversation, but for my future. Caroline thought I was almost gone. She had grossly underestimated Martha Williams. James arrived at 2:30, half an hour late. I watched from the living room window as he sat in his car for several minutes, cell phone pressed to his ear. No doubt getting last-minute coaching from Caroline. When he finally approached the door, his shoulders were hunched, his expression guarded. This wasn't my confident son. This was a man being pulled in different directions. Mom, he said as I let him in, his voice carefully neutral. He didn't move to hug me as he normally would. Would you like some coffee? I offered, maintaining the familiar rhythms of our relationship, despite the tension humming between us. No, he started, then stopped himself. Actually, yes, that would be nice. In the kitchen, I went through the motions of preparing coffee, giving us both a moment to settle. James sat at the small table by the window, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, where Harold and I had taught him to play cards, where we'd shared countless family meals. "Caroline's upset," he said finally as I set a mug in front of him. "I imagine she is," I replied, taking the seat across from him. "She doesn't understand why you'd suddenly stop helping with the mortgage. We were counting on that money, Mom. The payment's due next week and we don't have it." I took a sip of my coffee, letting his words hang in the air between us. "Did you tell her that you've known all along where the money was coming from?" James's gaze dropped to his mug. "It wasn't like that." "What was it like then, James? Help me understand." He shifted uncomfortably. "When we bought the house, Caroline had her heart set on Oakwood Estates. The payments were more than we could afford, but she was so excited about being in that neighborhood, about Emma and David going to those schools." "So you lied to her?" I pressed. "I didn't lie exactly, I just didn't correct her assumptions. She thought my promotion would cover it, and I kept thinking I'd get another raise or a bonus, and I could start making the payments myself without her ever knowing. But that didn't happen." James shook his head. "No, and then the mortgage became this secret between us, between you and me. I never meant for it to go on so long." I studied my son's face, seeing both the man he'd become and the boy he'd been. "Why did you tell Caroline that I was almost gone?" His head snapped up, eyes wide with shock. "What? I never said that?" "Someone did," I said calmly. "At Emma's birthday party. I heard Caroline tell Emma that I was almost gone anyway, and that all she had to do was smile and nod and think about the inheritance." The color drained from James's face. "Mom, I had no idea, I swear. I believed him. My son had many flaws, but cruelty wasn't one of them. Weakness, perhaps. A willingness to look the other way, to avoid conflict, to take the path of least resistance." "How long has Caroline been talking about my inheritance?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart ache. "She's been planning things. Renovations to the house, a vacation home in Vermont. She talks about what we'll do when we have Mom's money." "And you never thought to stop her? To remind her that I'm still very much alive and might have my own plans for my money?" "I thought it was just talk," he said weakly. "I didn't think she actually meant that she's waiting for me to die so she can have my house." I finished for him. James flinched. "Mom, please, it's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I set my mug down carefully. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you and Caroline have been counting on my death to solve your financial problems." "No." The protest was immediate, his face flushing with shame. "I mean, Caroline might have some expectations, but I never—" "James," I interrupted gently, "do you know how much money I've given you and Caroline over the past 5 years?" He blinked, caught off guard by the change in direction. "I don't know exactly. The mortgage payments, the down payment on the house. $147,630, I said, watching his expression closely. "Not including the countless hours I've spent caring for Emma and David while you and Caroline worked or traveled." His mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. "I don't regret helping you," I continued. "You're my son, and I love you. I love my grandchildren. But I'm beginning to realize that my help hasn't actually been helping. It's been enabling you and Caroline to live beyond your means while treating me as a convenience." "That's not fair," James protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I leaned forward. "When was the last time you asked me about my day, my interests, my plans for the future?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, James. I'm trying to make you understand why things need to change." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm 68 years old. I'm not almost gone. I could easily have 20 more years ahead of me. And I intend to live them, not just exist as a financial resource and occasional babysitter." James's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom. I never meant for things to get like this." "I know," I said softly, "but intentions don't change reality. The reality is that I'm making changes in my life, starting with the mortgage payments." "What are we supposed to do?" The question held a note of desperation. "Caroline's already talking about having to pull Emma out of her dance classes. David might have to quit the soccer team." I felt a twinge of grandmother's guilt, but pushed it aside. "Those are choices you and Caroline will have to make as a family. You might need to downsize, or Caroline might need to take on more work. You might need to adjust your expectations." "Caroline will never agree to sell the house," James said miserably. "Then Caroline will need to figure out how to pay for it. I replied, my voice firm. I've made my decision, James. I won't be changing my mind. He nodded slowly, resignation settling over his features. I understand. He hesitated, then asked, is this just about the mortgage, or are there other changes coming? The question was so perfectly aligned with what I'd been considering that I almost smiled. Caroline's influence was clear. He was fishing for information about my estate plans. Life is full of changes, I said carefully. I'm at a point where I need to think about my future. Of course, he said quickly. I just meant, we've always talked about Emma and David's college funds and the family vacation property we were planning to buy together. Plans I'd never agreed to, but Caroline had clearly been counting on. James, I said gently, I think it's time for you and Caroline to make your own plans without assumptions about my money. I have my own dreams to consider. His brow furrowed. Dreams? What dreams? The genuine confusion in his voice confirmed what I already knew. He had never considered that I might have aspirations beyond supporting his family. I'm taking a photography class, I said, choosing not to elaborate on my larger plans. It starts next week. Photography? He seemed bewildered, as if I'd announced I was joining the circus. Since when are you interested in photography? Since college, actually. There's a lot about me you don't know, James. I stood up, signaling that our conversation was winding down. I think we both have a lot to think about. He rose reluctantly, clearly unsatisfied with the outcome of our talk. Caroline's going to want to speak with you herself. I'm sure she will, I replied calmly. But right now, I need some time to myself. Please tell Caroline I'll call her when I'm ready to talk. At the door, James turned back, his expression troubled. Mom, are we okay? You and me? I looked at my son, my only child, my heart walking outside my body, and felt the complicated tangle of love and disappointment that defined our relationship. We will be, I said finally. But things are going to be different from now on. After he left, I sat in Harold's old armchair, emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. The confrontation I'd been dreading was over, and I had stood my ground. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Caroline wants to come over tomorrow to talk. She's very upset. I typed a simple reply. Not tomorrow. I'll let you know when I'm ready. Setting the phone aside, I picked up the community center brochure and began reading about the photography class, a small smile playing at my lips. Caroline would have to wait. For the first time in years, Martha Williams had other plans. Chapter 5. The Consequence. The next 3 days passed in a strange, peaceful silence. James didn't call again, though he sent a few tentative texts checking in. Caroline's name appeared on my phone several times, but I let the calls go to voicemail. Her messages grew increasingly desperate, then angry, then falsely conciliatory. Martha, we really need to talk about this misunderstanding. I can't believe you're doing this to our family. We've always been so close, Martha. Please don't let a silly comment ruin our relationship. I deleted them all. Instead, I focused on my meetings with Eleanor and the team of financial advisors she'd connected me with. Together, we crafted a comprehensive plan for my future, one that protected my assets and ensured they would be used according to my wishes, not Caroline's expectations. The trust for Emma and David is straightforward, Eleanor explained as we finalized the documents in her office. The money can only be used for education, healthcare, or a first home purchase. They'll have access to the principal at age 30, by which time they'll hopefully have developed the maturity to manage it responsibly. I nodded, satisfied. My grandchildren would be provided for, but not in a way that enabled the entitled behavior I'd seen developing in them, particularly Emma, who at 16 was already showing concerning signs of her mother's materialistic values. And the rest? I asked. Eleanor smiled. The rest is exactly as we discussed. Your house, investments, and remaining assets will be placed in a charitable remainder trust. You'll receive income from the trust for the rest of your life, and upon your death, the remainder will go to the Harold Williams Memorial Scholarship Fund at the community college. The scholarship had been my most inspired idea, a way to honor Harold while helping others achieve the education he had always wanted for me. It would provide nursing scholarships for single parents, creating a legacy that aligned with our values. Caroline's going to be furious, I said, not without a certain grim satisfaction. Caroline has no legal right to your assets, Eleanor reminded me. You've provided generously for your grandchildren. Your obligations end there. As I signed the final documents, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For decades, I had carried the burden of everyone's expectations, sacrificing my own needs and desires to fulfill them. Now finally I was making choices that reflected my own values and priorities. That afternoon, I visited a real estate agent recommended by Helen from the community center. Sarah Phillips specialized in helping seniors downsize and find more suitable living arrangements. I'm not sure exactly what I'm looking for, I admitted as we sat in her cozy office. I just know my current house is too large, too full of memories, and increasingly difficult to maintain. Sarah nodded understandingly. Many of my clients feel the same way. Let's start with the basics. What's most important to you in a home at this stage of your life? I considered the question. I'd like something smaller but not cramped. A garden, but not a large yard to maintain. I'd prefer to stay in town, close to the community center and downtown, and I'd like a space that feels like mine, not just a smaller version of the family home. Have you considered the riverside condominiums? Sarah asked. They were renovated last year and they're within walking distance of downtown. Each unit has a small private patio for container gardening, and the complex has a community garden for residents who want more space. The idea was intriguing. I'd driven past the riverside development many times but had never considered it for myself. The complex had a modern, airy feel, with walking paths along the river and a small clubhouse where residents gathered for social events. I'd like to see them, I decided. Sarah smiled. I have time this afternoon if you'd like to go now. 2 hours later, I stood on the balcony of a third-floor unit looking out over the river. The space was bright and open, with gleaming hardwood floors and large windows that flooded the rooms with natural light. The kitchen was smaller than mine but efficiently designed, with modern appliances and plenty of counter space for baking. The master bedroom had an ensuite bathroom with a walk-in shower, much safer than the old tub at home that was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. What do you think? Sarah asked, joining me on the balcony. I think I could be happy. Here, I said, surprised by how right it felt. The HOA fees cover all exterior maintenance, landscaping, and amenities, Sarah explained, and there's a 24-hour concierge in the lobby, which many of my clients find reassuring for security. I nodded, already imagining my new life here. Morning. Coffee on the balcony, walks along the river, dinners with new friends in the community dining room. A life where I wasn't defined by my role as mother or grandmother, but as Martha, a woman with her own interests and desires. How soon could I move in? I asked. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. This unit is actually available immediately. Are you thinking of making an offer? Yes, I said, the decision crystallizing in my mind. I am. Don't you want to think about it overnight? Or perhaps show it to your family first? I shook my head. This is my decision. I don't need anyone else's approval. By the time I returned home, I had signed the initial paperwork and set things in motion. My house would go on the market the following week, and if all went well, I could be in my new condominium within a month. I was arranging some papers on my dining room table when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Caroline's sleek SUV parked in my driveway. I considered not answering, but I knew this confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it on my terms, in my space, while I still felt strong and certain. Caroline stood, on my porch, her expression carefully arranged into one of concerned affection. She wore a cashmere sweater and pearls, as if dressed for a luncheon rather than a confrontation. Martha, she said warmly as I opened the door. I'm so glad you're home. We really need to talk. I stepped aside to let her in, maintaining a polite, but distant demeanor. I have a few minutes. She swept into the living room, her gaze darting around as if assessing whether anything had changed since her last visit. Her eyes lingered on the pile of community center brochures on the coffee table, her brow furrowing slightly. James told me about your conversation, she began, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? I remained standing, unwilling to settle into the familiar pattern of our interactions where Caroline dominated the conversation. Of course, she said, her voice taking on the condescending tone she often used with me, as if explaining something to a confused child. Whatever you think you heard at Emma's party was completely misinterpreted. I would never say anything disrespectful about you. I let the lie hang in the air between us. Caroline, let's not pretend. I heard what you said, word for word. You called me an old hag who's almost gone anyway. You told Emma to think about the inheritance whenever she had to interact with me. Caroline's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. You must have misheard. Perhaps it was someone else talking about their own mother-in-law. You know how these parties can be, voices carrying. Please stop, I said quietly. I'm not angry anymore, Caroline. I'm just done. Her facade slipped for a moment, irritation flashing across her features. Done with what? Exactly? With helping? Your son, with being a grandmother to Emma and David? Done with being used, I replied simply. Done with being valued only for what I can provide financially. Done with the pretense that we have a relationship based on anything other than your expectations of what you'll get when I die. Caroline's mouth tightened into a thin line. So dramatic, Martha. This is exactly why James thought it was better. Not to tell you about the mortgage. You always overreact. I almost smiled at the transparent attempt to shift blame. I've made some changes, Caroline. Not just about the mortgage. Her eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. What kind of changes? I've revised my will and established trusts for Emma and David, I said calmly. Their education will be provided for. And the house? She asked quickly, unable to hide her interest. Your savings? The life insurance from Harold? I maintained. Steady eye contact. My assets will be managed according to my wishes, not your expectations. The mask of affection dropped completely, her face hardening with anger. You can't do this to us. We're family. James is your only child. Yes, he is, I agreed, and I love him deeply, but I won't enable the lifestyle you've built on the assumption of my death. That stops now. Caroline stood abruptly, her hands clenched at her sides. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone, when you need help, don't expect us to be there. For you. The threat might have wounded me once, but now it only confirmed that I'd made the right decision. I've never expected anything from you, Caroline. That's the difference between us. Her gaze swept around the living room again, this time more calculating. Is that why you're taking those classes at the senior center? Looking for a replacement family because you've alienated your real one? I felt a surge of pity for this woman who could only understand relationships in terms of what they provided materially. I'm taking those classes because I enjoy them. Because I'm still alive, Caroline, despite being almost gone. She flinched, at her own words being thrown back at her. This isn't over, she said as she moved toward the door. James won't let you throw away everything we've built. I followed her, maintaining a calm dignity that seemed to infuriate her further. James knows where to find me if he wants to talk. Emma and David are always welcome here. But you and I, Caroline, I think we understand each other perfectly now. After she left, I watched through the window as she sat in her car, furiously, typing on her phone, no doubt crafting a narrative for James that cast me as the villain. I felt a momentary pang of sadness for my son, caught between his mother and his wife. But he was an adult who had made his choices, just as I was finally making mine. I turned away from the window and looked at the dining room table, where brochures for the Riverside condominiums lay next to paint color samples and furniture catalogs. My new life was taking shape, piece by piece, choice by choice. Caroline thought this wasn't over, but she was wrong. For me, it was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood on my balcony at Riverside, watching autumn leaves drift onto the water. My new home had transformed into a true reflection of myself. Smaller than my old house, but filled only with things that brought me joy. I'd kept Harold's reading chair, my grandmother's china, and the wedding quilt my mother made. Everything else I'd either sold, donated, or given to Emma and David. The walls displayed my own photographs from weekly excursions with the photography club. Kitchen shelves held homemade preserves and tea blends from my cooking classes. My phone chimed with a text from Helen. Art walk tonight, meeting at 6. I smiled as I typed back, wouldn't miss it. Helen had become a dear friend, introducing me to vibrant people who were embracing this chapter of their lives, rather than merely enduring it. The transition hadn't been painless. James had been distant at first, influenced by Caroline's anger. Weekly dinners with my grandchildren stopped. My first month here had moments of doubt and loneliness, but gradually, things shifted. Emma reached out first, calling about a family recipe. I'd invited her over, and she'd arrived curious and wary. By the end of our baking session, something had thawed between us. I like your place, Grandma, she'd said. It feels like you. That's exactly what I was going for, I'd replied, touched by her perception. Emma returned the following week with David. They explored the Riverside trails with me, surprised to discover their grandmother had interests beyond them. James's first visit had been awkward, his eyes taking in my new life with confusion and something like respect. You seem different, he'd said as we drank coffee on my balcony. I am different. I'm finally living for myself, not just for everyone else. He nodded slowly. Caroline's still upset. I imagine she is. She wanted me to ask about the will again. I set my cup down. My estate plans haven't changed. Emma and David's education is provided for. The rest will go to the scholarship fund. He surprised me by reaching for my hand. I think Dad would have liked that. Those words began healing something between us. James started visiting regularly, and we talked more openly than we had in years, rediscovering each other as adults rather than just mother and son. Caroline remained the only holdout, making snide comments about my selfish phase whenever Emma or David mentioned visiting me. A knock at the door pulled me from my reflections. When I opened it, I found Caroline. She looked different, her polished appearance frayed at the edges. Her hair was in a simple ponytail, her clothes casual rather than designer. "Martha," she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, surprised. She moved past me, her gaze taking in my space with undisguised curiosity. "It's nice," she said finally. "Smaller than I expected." "It's all I need," I replied. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded, and I busied myself in the kitchen. When I returned, Caroline was studying my photographs. "You took these?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "Yes, with my photography class. We go on weekly field trips." She accepted the tea. "James said you've been busy." "I have been. Photography, cooking workshops, volunteer work. I'm helping organize an exhibition next month." Caroline sat perched on the edge of the sofa. "That's good." An awkward silence stretched between us. "Caroline, why are you here?" She set her mug down carefully. "We're selling the house." Of all the things I'd expected, this wasn't one of them. "I see. After you stopped the mortgage payments, we tried to keep up, but..." She trailed off. "Anyway, we found a smaller place. Not in Oakwood Estates, but in a decent school district." I nodded. "That sounds sensible. Emma's upset about changing schools. She blames you." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "She's welcome anytime. Maybe having a grandmother who made difficult changes will help her adjust to her own." Caroline's lips tightened. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small package. "It's your birthday next week. Emma made this for you." I accepted it, touched that my granddaughter had remembered. "Please thank her for me. You could tell her yourself." "Sunday dinner. James wanted me to invite you." I studied Caroline's face, looking for manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and perhaps grudging acceptance. "I'd like that," I said finally. At the door, she paused. "When James and I first married, I thought you were the perfect mother-in-law. You never interfered, always helped, never complained." Waited, sensing more. "I didn't realize you weren't being perfect. You were being invisible, making yourself small so we could be comfortable." Her gaze met mine. "I still think what you did was selfish, but I understand it better now." That evening, as I walked through the art gallery with Helen, I thought about Caroline's visit with a sense of closure. We would never be close, but perhaps we could exist in each other's lives with honesty rather than pretense. "What do you think of this one?" Helen asked, pointing to a vibrant abstract canvas. "I like it," I said. "It's not afraid to take up space." Helen laughed. "That could be your new motto." As we continued through the gallery, a deep contentment settled over me. At 68, I had finally learned that my worth wasn't measured by what I gave to others, but by the life I created for myself. Caroline had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most of all in her assessment that I was almost gone. I wasn't going anywhere. In fact, Martha Williams had only just arrived.